The pie sat untouched on the kitchen counter for the third Sunday in a row. Daniel Whitaker stared at it longer than he wanted to admit, watching the thin layer of cinnamon sugar settle over the golden crust like it was waiting for him to understand something he had missed for years. Clara Bennett had made that same pie every week for almost 6 years. Same size, same shape, same little twist of dough across the top. And every week, Daniel took one polite slice, thanked her, and walked away without seeing the message hidden in plain sight. But this Sunday was different. Clara stood behind the bakery counter with a tired smile, her hands resting on the old wooden surface she had polished every morning since opening Maple Hearth Bakery. "You really never noticed, did you?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked up from the pie. He thought she meant the recipe, the flavor, maybe some small change in the ingredients. "Noticed what?" he asked. Clara looked toward the window, where rain tapped softly against the glass, then back at him. For a moment, she looked like someone carrying a secret that had become too heavy to hold. "That was the question I was waiting for." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, but he didn't know why. He had spent most of his life fixing things before they became problems. Broken heaters, faulty wiring, leaking roofs, anything with a clear answer. But this was different. This was a question that had been sitting in front of him every week, and somehow he had never seen it. 6 years earlier, Daniel had learned how to become a father alone. After losing his wife, he stopped making plans beyond what was necessary. He woke up before sunrise, packed his daughter Nora's lunch, worked his repair jobs, paid the bills, and came home every night knowing he had done what he promised. He believed that was enough. He believed love was something you proved by staying, not something you talked about. But Clara knew something Daniel did not. She knew the pie was never about the pie. "I need you to look at it differently this time," she said. Daniel almost smiled. "Almost. Clara, it's just a pie." The moment the words left his mouth, he saw the smallest change in her expression. Not anger, not disappointment, something closer to sadness, like she had just heard an answer she had been afraid of hearing. She reached beneath the counter and pulled out an old recipe card, its edges worn and soft from years of being handled. She did not hand it to him. She simply placed it beside the pie. "Your wife wrote this," Clara said. Daniel stopped moving. The sound of the bakery disappeared beneath the sudden rush of memories he had spent years keeping quiet. His eyes moved from the card to the pie, then back again. "What do you mean my wife wrote it?" he asked. Clara lowered her voice. "Before she passed, she asked me to keep making this every week until you were ready to see what she left behind." Daniel looked down at the crust, at the familiar pattern he had ignored more times than he could count. For the first time, he noticed something unusual. One small piece of dough was shaped differently from all the others. A detail so simple he wondered how he had missed it for so long. And as Clara slowly pushed the recipe card toward him, Daniel realized the woman he lost might have been trying to tell him something all along. The only question was why she needed 6 years before he would finally listen. Daniel did not take the recipe card home that afternoon. He wanted to, but his fingers stopped just before touching it. Instead, he placed it carefully back on the counter, almost like the paper was something fragile that could disappear if he handled it the wrong way. Clara watched him without pushing. She had known Daniel long enough to understand that the hardest battles in his life were never the ones he fought in front of people. They were the quiet ones he carried home. "I need time," Daniel finally said. Clara nodded. "I know." But as he walked out of Maple Hearth Bakery, Daniel noticed something he had never noticed before. Clara did not look relieved that he finally knew. She looked worried. That stayed with him all the way home. The small wooden house at the edge of town was exactly how Daniel left it every morning. His work boots by the door, his jacket hanging on the same hook, Nora's school backpack leaning against the wall with a math worksheet sticking out of the front pocket. Everything had a place because Daniel believed order could protect a family from losing control. "Dad," Nora called from the kitchen. "You are home early." Daniel smiled and placed his keys on the table. Slow day. It was not true. He had 3 repair appointments waiting for Monday. But he had learned years ago that children noticed the weight adults carried, even when adults try to hide it. Nora looked at him for a moment longer than usual. "Did Clara finally tell you?" Daniel froze. The question was so unexpected that he forgot to pretend he was not surprised. "Tell me what?" Nora looked down at her homework. A second later, she realized she had revealed something she was not supposed to. "Nothing." Daniel pulled out the chair across from her. "Nora." She slowly closed her notebook. Dad, I promised I would not say anything. That answer created a bigger question than the one he had asked. A promise to whom? And why did his 15-year-old daughter know about a secret involving a pie he had ignored for years? Daniel sat quietly, waiting. Nora finally reached into the drawer beside the kitchen table and pulled out a small envelope. The paper was old, the corners softened from being touched many times. I found this 3 months ago while looking for your old tax papers, she said. I was going to give it to you, but I was scared. Daniel stared at the envelope. His name was written on the front in handwriting he recognized immediately. His wife's handwriting. The room became strangely quiet. Even the refrigerator humming in the corner seemed too loud. Why were you scared? Daniel asked. Nora looked toward the window before answering. Because Mom wrote it for you. Not for me. And I thought maybe you were happier not knowing. The words landed harder than Daniel expected. Happier not knowing. He wanted to say that was impossible. He wanted to say he had spent 6 years wondering if there was something he could have done differently. But the truth was, Nora had seen something he had refused to admit. He had built a life around surviving, not living. Daniel slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single page and one sentence at the top that made his hand stop moving. It was not a goodbye. It was not a memory. It was a question his wife had left behind, one that Daniel never expected to answer. If you are reading this, it means you finally noticed the pie. But did you ever notice the person who kept making it? Daniel looked up at Nora, then back at the letter. For the first time in years, he realized the secret was not only about what his wife had left behind. It was about what he had failed to see while she was still here. Daniel did not finish reading the letter that night. He folded the page carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. But sleep never came easily after that. The next morning, he was already standing outside Maple Hearth Bakery before the lights were turned on. He had one question, and he needed an answer before another day passed. But when Clara opened the door, she was not holding a pie. She was holding a small wooden box with a faded brass latch. Before you open this, she said, you need to know something. Daniel looked at the box, then at her face. What happened? Clara hesitated. Your wife did not only leave instructions about the recipe. She left a choice for you. Daniel had spent years believing choices were things you made when life was easy. But this one came with a price. Inside the box was a collection of old recipe cards, handwritten notes, and a small savings account booklet from a local credit union. Daniel recognized the account immediately. It was money he had set aside years ago for emergency repairs after his wife became sick. Why is this here? He asked. Clara looked down. Because she changed it. Daniel opened the booklet and saw the balance. It was not a fortune. It was not enough to change someone's life overnight. But it was enough to cover the final payment on the bakery's old equipment loan. Clara had been struggling quietly for months. The bakery's main oven was failing, and without it, she would have to close Maple Hearth Bakery before the holiday season. Daniel looked at her. You need this. Clara shook her head. No, I need you to decide. The word stopped him. For years, Daniel had saved every dollar because he thought protecting Nora meant never taking risks. Now he had a choice. Keep the money for his daughter's future, or use it to save the place where a promise had been kept for 6 years. The decision was not simple. That was exactly why Clara had waited. Daniel closed the booklet. How much time do you have? Clara looked surprised by the question. 3 weeks. Daniel nodded slowly. Then we fixed the oven. Clara blinked. Daniel, I did not ask you to do that. I know. He picked up his toolbox from the truck outside. That is why I am doing it. The first person to notice was Samuel Reed, Daniel's neighbor, who walked past the bakery and stopped when he saw Daniel working before sunrise. Samuel had known Daniel for years. He knew the man who repaired everyone else's problems, but rarely asked anyone to help with his own. You are charging her? Samuel asked. Daniel shook his head. No. Samuel looked at him carefully. Then why are you here? Daniel tightened a small bolt beneath the oven panel and answered without looking up. Because someone kept a promise for my family. The least I can do is keep one for hers. Clara heard those words from behind the counter. For the first time, she saw something she had been waiting years to see. Daniel was not just remembering the past. He was choosing the future. But while repairing the old oven, Daniel found something hidden behind the lower panel. A small envelope had slipped into the frame years earlier and remained untouched. It was covered in dust, but the handwriting on the front was clear. Clara saw the name written there and immediately stepped back. It was not Daniel's name. It was someone else's. someone who was never supposed to find it. And when Daniel turned the envelope over, he saw a return address that made Clara whisper the name she had hoped he would never discover. Daniel stared at the return address on the envelope and felt the strange weight of a name he had not heard in years. It belonged to Thomas Hale, his wife's older brother, a man who had disappeared from their lives shortly before her illness. Daniel remembered the arguments, the unanswered calls, and the silence that followed. He had assumed Thomas left because he did not want to be part of their struggle. But now his name was sitting inside the bakery oven, hidden for years, waiting to be found. Clara watched Daniel carefully. "There is something you need to understand before you open that," she said. "Your wife asked me to keep this separate from everything else." Daniel looked at her. "Why?" Clara did not answer immediately. That hesitation created a new fear inside him. If the letter was important enough to hide, what else had he never known? Daniel opened the envelope slowly. Inside was not a letter from Thomas. It was a legal document, a property transfer form, a document connected to Maple Hearth Bakery. Daniel read the first few lines, then stopped. The bakery had not always belonged to Clara. Years ago, his wife had quietly purchased a small percentage of the business when Clara was close to losing it. She had done it without telling anyone. Not Daniel. Not even Clara. She had believed people deserved help without having to carry the burden of gratitude. Daniel felt his throat tighten. His wife had been protecting people even when she was fighting for her own health. But before he could read further, the bakery door opened. A man in a gray coat stepped inside carrying a folder. His name was Richard Vaughn, the new representative for a development company that had recently purchased several buildings around town. He smiled politely, but his eyes moved immediately toward the old oven, the paperwork, and the envelope in Daniel's hand. "I was hoping to speak with Clara," Richard said. Clara's expression changed. "About what?" Richard placed the folder on the counter. "The lease renewal." Daniel noticed Clara's hands tighten around the edge of the counter. "What lease renewal?" he asked. Richard looked surprised. "She did not tell you?" The question was not loud, but it carried weight. Daniel turned toward Clara. She looked away. Richard explained that the building owner planned to increase the rent by almost double after the holiday season. Without a new agreement, Maple Hearth Bakery would have to leave. Daniel looked around the bakery. The wooden tables. The old photographs. The corner where Nora used to sit after school when she was younger. Suddenly the pie was not the only thing connected to his family's past. This place was part of the promise his wife had left behind. "How long has this been happening?" Daniel asked. Clara lowered her eyes. 3 months. "And you said nothing?" "Because you had already lost enough." Daniel wanted to argue, but he could not. He understood that sentence too well. Richard picked up the folder. "I am sorry, but emotional history does not change business decisions. The owner has already made plans for the space." Daniel looked at the papers. Something about the timing felt wrong. Why now? Why after Clara discovered he knew about the bakery? Why did someone suddenly want this place gone? Before Richard left, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, answered quickly, and turned away. Daniel heard only one sentence before the man walked outside. "No, the Whitaker name is not supposed to be involved yet." Daniel stood completely still. Clara looked at him, confused. What did he mean? Daniel did not answer. He was looking at the old recipe cards, the hidden documents, and the name that had appeared in a conversation where it did not belong. For 6 years, he thought the pie was a message from the past. Now he realized it might have been a warning about the future. Daniel returned to Maple Hearth Bakery before sunrise the next morning, but this time he was not carrying his toolbox. He was carrying the old recipe cards, the legal documents, and the questions that had been waiting longer than he realized. The first thing he noticed was Clara sitting alone at the counter, staring at the same wooden box she had shown him the day before. She looked different, not afraid, tired, like someone who had spent years protecting a promise and suddenly realized the promise had come back to ask something from her. "How much did you know?" Daniel asked. Clara did not pretend she misunderstood. "More than I told you." That answer hurt more than he expected. Not because she kept a secret, but because Daniel had spent his whole life believing honesty was the one thing people could always give each other. Clara opened the wooden box again and removed another envelope. "Your wife left instructions. She wanted you to find things in the right order." Daniel looked at the papers scattered across the table. Why would she make it this complicated? Clara touched the edge of the recipe card. "Because she knew you, Daniel. She knew you would try to fix everything before you allowed yourself to feel anything. The words stayed with him because they were true. Inside the second envelope was a handwritten note. It was short. It did not explain everything. It only mentioned 3 names: Clara Bennett, Thomas Hale, and Daniel Whitaker. But beneath those names was a sentence that changed how Daniel saw the entire story. The bakery was never meant to belong to one person. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. For years, he thought Clara had been the person his wife was trying to help. But now he wondered if the help had been meant for someone else too. Before Daniel could ask, Nora walked into the bakery holding her phone. "Dad, I think you need to see this." She showed him a picture she had taken from an old family album. It was a photograph of his wife standing outside Maple Hearth Bakery almost 7 years earlier. But Clara was not beside her. Thomas Hale was there too. And standing behind them was a man Daniel recognized from the folder Richard Vaughn had brought the day before. The same developer representative who claimed he was only handling a business decision. Daniel felt the pieces shifting. The bakery was not just a small family business. It was connected to people who had been watching it for years. "Who was that man?" Daniel asked Clara. She looked at the photograph and went silent. That silence answered more than words could. "Clara," Daniel said gently, "what are you not telling me?" She walked to the back room and returned with an old metal container. Inside were receipts, letters, and a small notebook that belonged to his wife. The notebook contained dates, meetings, names, and one detail Daniel never expected to see. His wife had been investigating why several small businesses in town were disappearing one by one. She had discovered a pattern. Buildings were being purchased. Longtime owners were pressured to leave. Family businesses that carried decades of history were replaced with something newer and more profitable. But there was one question Daniel could not answer. Why had his wife been involved? She had never told him about any of this. She had never mentioned business conflicts, property disputes, or hidden agreements. Clara finally spoke. "Because she knew you would put yourself in the middle of it." Daniel looked at the notebook again. On the final page was a message written only days before his wife passed away. The ink was faded, but every word was clear. "If Daniel ever finds this, it means the people I trusted failed to protect what mattered." Daniel slowly turned the page. The next line was covered by a folded piece of paper attached to the notebook. And written on the outside were 4 words that made Clara step back. "Do not show Daniel." Daniel did not open the folded paper attached to the notebook immediately. For the first time in years, he stopped himself from rushing toward an answer. He looked at Clara. He looked at Nora. He looked at the bakery that had quietly carried pieces of his family's history while he was too focused on surviving to notice. "Why would she write that?" Daniel asked. Clara took a slow breath. "Because your wife knew someone would eventually come looking for this place." Daniel unfolded the paper carefully. Inside was not a warning. It was a list. Names of small businesses around town. Dates they closed. Property records. Ownership changes. Each one looked ordinary until Daniel placed them side by side. Then the pattern became impossible to ignore. The bakery was not an isolated situation. It was one piece of something much larger. Nora moved closer, reading the pages beside him. "Dad." She was trying to protect people. Daniel nodded slowly, but another question appeared. If his wife knew this was happening, why did she never ask him for help? Why did she carry it alone? Clara answered before he could ask. "Because she knew what you would do." Daniel looked at her. "What would I do?" Clara gave a small, sad smile. "You would forget your own limits. You would try to save everyone." Those words followed him because they described the man he had become. A man who repaired neighbors' heaters for free when they could not afford it. A man who stayed late at work because another father needed time with his children. A man who never complained because he believed his problems were his responsibility alone. But now the same instinct that made people trust him could put everything at risk. The next clue came from an unexpected place. Samuel Reed arrived at the bakery carrying a newspaper from that morning. He placed it on the counter without saying a word. The headline was about a new commercial development project in town. The company behind it was the same company connected to Richard Vaughn. But below the article was something else. A photograph from a business meeting years earlier. Daniel picked it up. His eyes stopped on one person in the picture. Thomas Hale, his wife's brother. The man everyone thought had disappeared. He was involved with them? Daniel asked. Samuel shook his head. "No, that is why this matters." He pointed at the photograph. Thomas was not sitting with the developers. He was standing across from them, fighting them. Daniel felt the story change again. The person he believed abandoned his family might have been trying to protect them. Then Clara placed another document on the table. This one had Daniel's name on it. His first reaction was confusion. His second was concern. The document showed that years ago, before his wife passed away, she had quietly placed ownership rights connected to Maple Hearth Bakery into a trust that could only be activated under one condition. Daniel had to choose whether to accept it. Why would she leave the decision to me, he asked. Clara looked toward the old oven. Because she did not want you to inherit a responsibility. She wanted you to decide if you were ready to carry one. Before Daniel could answer, his phone rang. The number was unknown. He almost ignored it, but something made him pick up. A woman's voice came through the speaker. Older, shaking slightly. Is this Daniel Whitaker? He looked at Clara. Yes. Who is this? The woman paused. My name is Evelyn Hale. I am Thomas Hale's daughter. Daniel stood still. Clara's expression changed instantly. Evelyn continued. I have been trying to reach you for years. Your wife left something with my father before she passed. Daniel gripped the phone tighter. What did she leave? There was silence on the other end. Then Evelyn said the words that changed everything. The original document proving who really owns Maple Hearth Bakery. Daniel stayed silent after the call ended, still holding the phone against his ear even though Evelyn Hale had already disconnected. For years, he believed the missing pieces of his wife's story were lost forever. Now he was learning that people had been protecting those pieces, waiting for the right moment to return them. But the right moment had arrived with a deadline. Richard Vaughn's company had scheduled the final paperwork meeting for the following morning. If the bakery changed ownership before Daniel understood the documents, the place his wife fought to protect could disappear. Clara watched him carefully. What are you going to do? Daniel looked at the old recipe cards spread across the counter. For once, he did not answer immediately. The old Daniel would have rushed forward, taken control, and carried the entire burden himself. But his wife's message had changed something. Maybe the point was not to carry everything alone. I am going to listen first, he said. That decision surprised everyone, especially Clara. The first person Daniel contacted was not a lawyer. It was Evelyn Hale. She arrived at Maple Hearth Bakery that afternoon carrying a small leather folder that had belonged to her father. Inside were copies of old agreements, handwritten notes, and one document that changed the meaning of everything. Thomas Hale had not abandoned the family. He had spent years gathering evidence because he believed someone was trying to take advantage of small business owners who trusted the wrong people. But there was another truth that hurt even more. Thomas had stopped contacting Daniel because he believed Daniel would blame himself. He knew Daniel had already lost enough. He did not want to become another problem Daniel felt responsible for solving. Daniel looked at the documents and realized how many people had made choices based on protecting him. Clara protected the promise. Thomas protected the evidence. His wife protected everyone around her. But Daniel had protected himself by staying closed. The next morning, the meeting at Maple Hearth Bakery began. Richard Vaughn arrived expecting a simple signature. He brought the same folder from before and spoke with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided. I hope we can make this easy, Richard said. The agreement is prepared. Daniel placed a different folder on the table. So is ours. Richard's expression changed slightly. Inside Daniel's folder were the records Evelyn provided, property documents, and proof that the ownership transfer Richard's company was relying on had never been completed legally. The room became quiet. Clara looked at Daniel. She had spent years waiting for him to notice what mattered. Now she saw something different. He was not trying to win. He was trying to protect what belonged to people who had trusted him. Richard remained calm, but his confidence disappeared. You understand this could become complicated, he said. Daniel nodded. It already was. People just did not know it yet. Then Richard received a phone call. He stepped away from the table and answered quietly. His face changed as he listened. When he returned, he was holding a new document. There is one more issue, he said. Your wife's trust has a condition. Daniel looked at the paper. What condition? Richard placed it down slowly. The trust can only transfer control if Daniel Whitaker proves he was the person your wife intended to protect the bakery with. Everyone looked at Daniel. The evidence had cleared the first obstacle. The documents had changed the balance. But the final question was not about ownership. It was about whether Daniel truly understood the promise his wife had left behind. And then Richard opened the last page of the agreement. revealing a signature that no one in the room expected to see. The room went completely silent when Richard Vaughn turned the final page of the agreement around. Daniel expected another obstacle, another condition, another reason why the promise his wife left behind could slip away. Instead, he saw a signature. Not his wife's. Not Clara's. It belonged to Thomas Hale. But beneath it was a second signature that made Daniel stop breathing for a moment. His own name, dated 6 years earlier. That is impossible, Daniel whispered. He remembered signing countless papers after his wife's illness. Medical forms, insurance documents, household records. But this one was different. It was an agreement created before he had even understood what was happening around him. Evelyn stepped forward and explained that Thomas had prepared the document because Daniel's wife wanted one thing protected above everything else. Not the bakery, not the property, the people who made the bakery matter. The agreement stated that ownership would never be transferred to someone who only saw Maple Hearth Bakery as a financial opportunity. It required the next person in control to prove they understood the value of the community built around it. Richard looked uncomfortable for the first time. The confidence he walked in with was gone because the document exposed something he never expected. The bakery was never an easy purchase. It was a promise designed to outlast people who only cared about profit. But Daniel noticed something else. The agreement did not give him automatic control. It gave him a choice. He could sell the rights, take the money, and walk away from the responsibility. Or he could keep the bakery open and accept everything that came with it. The decision was not about winning. It was about becoming the person his wife believed he could be. Daniel looked around the bakery. He saw the old wooden tables where families had celebrated birthdays. He saw the small corner where Nora used to finish her homework after school. He saw Clara standing quietly behind the counter, the same place where she had made one pie every week while waiting for him to understand something deeper than a recipe. "I do not want this because it belongs to my family," Daniel said. "I want it because it belongs to everyone who found a piece of their family here." Clara lowered her eyes, and for the first time in years, Daniel saw her smile without carrying the weight of a secret. Richard gathered his papers and left without another argument. The agreement, the records, and the evidence were enough. The bakery was protected, but the biggest change did not happen in the courtroom or a business meeting. It happened when Daniel returned home that evening. Nora was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. Daniel placed the old recipe card beside her. "I should have listened sooner," he said. Nora looked at him carefully. "To Mom." Daniel shook his head. "To everyone who was trying to remind me I was not alone." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Nora opened the recipe card and pointed to a small note written on the back that Daniel had never seen before. It was not part of the original message. It was something his wife had added later. A final reminder. Daniel read the words slowly, and his eyes filled with emotion. "The people who love you will leave signs. Do not spend so much time surviving that you forget to look for them." The following week, Maple Hearth Bakery reopened after the repairs were finished. The first pie came out of the oven exactly the way it always had. But this time Daniel did not walk past it. He helped Clara place it on the counter, and together they waited for the first customers to arrive. Yet before the morning ended, a stranger entered the bakery carrying a small envelope addressed to Daniel Whitaker. There was no return address, only 3 words written on the front. "For the next promise." The envelope sitting on the bakery counter remained unopened for nearly 10 minutes. Daniel Whitaker had spent years chasing answers. But now that another secret had found its way to him, he realized something had changed. The old Daniel would have opened it immediately, searched for every missing piece, and tried to solve the entire story before anyone else could. Instead, he looked around Maple Hearth Bakery and smiled. For the first time in years, he was not afraid of not knowing everything. "Open it with us," Nora said softly. Daniel looked at his daughter, then at Clara. He understood what they were giving him. Not permission, not approval. Company. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single recipe card, older than all the others. At the top was written the same simple title his wife had used years ago. But beneath it was a note that changed the meaning of every Sunday afternoon he had spent ignoring that pie. It was not a message about loss. It was a message about time. His wife had written about ordinary moments. The mornings when Daniel packed lunches before work. The evenings when he came home exhausted, but still sat beside Nora to hear about her day. The small repairs around the house that he completed without anyone asking. She had noticed all of it. She had never measured his love by grand gestures. She had measured it by the quiet things he did when nobody was watching. Daniel held the card for a long moment. The same man who once believed he had failed because he could not save the past finally understood that he had been building something every day after it. Clara placed the familiar pie on the counter, the same kind she had made every week. But this time Daniel noticed what he had missed before. The small pattern in the crust was not random. It represented 3 people standing together. Him, Nora, and Clara. A reminder that family was not always the people you started with. Sometimes it was the people who stayed. Months passed, and Maple Hearth Bakery became busier than it had ever been. Not because it became larger or more modern, but because people felt something when they walked through the door. They saw the photographs on the walls. They saw Clara teaching young bakers the recipes she once protected. They saw Daniel fixing broken chairs and checking the old oven every morning, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. One afternoon, a young customer asked Daniel why the bakery still made the same pie every Sunday. He looked at Clara, who smiled and waited for his answer. Daniel thought about the first day he saw that pie and walked away without understanding it. Because some things are worth waiting for, he finally said. But the story did not end with the pie. It continued at home. Nora left for college the following year, but she carried one recipe card with her. Not because she needed instructions on how to bake, because she wanted a reminder that love could be hidden inside ordinary moments. Before leaving, she told her father something he never forgot. Mom spent years trying to teach you something. I think you finally learned it. Daniel laughed quietly. What did she teach me? Nora smiled. That people are always telling you they love you. Sometimes they just do it differently than you expect. Years later, when Daniel stood inside Maple Hearth Bakery on another Sunday morning, he still saw the first pie on the counter. But it no longer reminded him of what he lost. It reminded him of everything that remained. The promise was never about a recipe. It was about noticing the people who choose you, the moments you almost miss, and the love that quietly waits for you to look closer. Thank you for watching until the end of the video.